of Legion Bill 1645. It's an honor to host. I'm glad to see everyone. There's beverages in the front and ice cream for everyone. Without any further ado, wait a minute. I'm Tom Keenan, I'm the commander. I just got elected to do this. Thank you. Without further ado, our congressman in his first community meeting, Anthony Brindisi.
Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate everyone coming out on a Saturday afternoon. I was worried about the rescheduling of the last town hall, but I'm glad you all are here. And let's hear it for our commander. Let's hear it for all of our veterans who are protecting our country. I'll just start off by saying a few words. I want to give you all a quick update about things that are going on in Washington. A lot going on in Washington, as I'm sure you're seeing. I'll give you a few updates on some of the things I've been working on over the last couple weeks, and then really just open it up for questions. I'm going to try and be respectful of the Legion's time. We got to be out of here by about 6 o'clock, so around 5:45 we're going to try and wrap things up. So if for some reason I don't get to you, please feel free to reach out to our office. We have several staff members here. If I can have our staff raise their hands. Harris is over here on the side. You see Harris. Sarah, who is my district director, is in the back. Joelle and Faith is at the table over there. So if you have any questions, if there's a particular constituent issue that you are concerned about, that you want to talk privately, please feel free to see either myself afterwards or one of our staff members. This is really what our job is. It's the constituent services. So if you're having a veterans issue, a Social Security issue, an IRS issue, Medicare, whatever it may be, please make sure you reach out to one of our constituent service caseworkers, and we'll be able to start a file for you and work on whatever concern you might have. So thanks for being here. It's been an exciting few weeks, I can say. I never thought we would be in the middle of a government shutdown when I got sworn in. First one in history for a new Congress being sworn in, but we are here, and I was kind of worried when I got the news yesterday that the government was going to be reopening. The leaders made a deal to reopen the government for 3 weeks, that I was not going to be able to be here today, that they were going to call us down to Washington, but unfortunately we were able to pass through what they call unanimous consent yesterday to reopen the government. If one person, now there's 435 members of Congress, if one person had objected to that, I would have had a plane down to Washington today, and we would have to have rescheduled this again. But I guess no one member of Congress wanted to be that one person opening up today. But it's been a challenging few weeks. All the new members have had some frustration because we've all campaigned on some big ideas, whether it's health care, whether it's strengthening Medicare and Social Security, whether it's prescription drugs or immigration or whatever the issue may be. A lot of that stuff has got put on the back burner because the government shutdown has been happening. So I've been trying over the last few weeks really to work with some members on both sides of the aisle, because there are some reasonable people down there, believe it or not, on both sides who really want to try and find some solutions to get through both the government shutdown, but also on some of the big issues that have been plaguing Washington the last few years, like immigration reform. I'm pleased that we opened up and the president agreed and congressional leaders agreed to allow us 3 weeks to negotiate some kind of a deal on border security and immigration to really move things forward. This is imperative that we do this. I don't think that using a government shutdown to get what you want is a great idea. I think we have to make sure. I think we have to make sure that we have discussions, and we have big differences, but we should be talking about those outside of a government shutdown because this has really hurt the country. And I can tell you firsthand because we've been receiving the phone calls the last few weeks from people not only directly employed by the federal government, and I can talk about them, but also people who are either relying on some kind of government assistance or loans We heard from farmers. Many of our farmers are facing so many challenges right now, especially our dairy farmers, relying on emergency loans coming from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Those were put on hold. You have small businesses relying on SBA loans that are put on hold. You have people who are directly employed by the federal government. We had a call from one gentleman who's an air traffic controller. Okay, he had moved his whole family up from Fort Lauderdale up to Syracuse to work up at Hancock Airport. And started the job, wasn't getting paid, and he said, by February I'm going to be evicted from my office, my home. And I moved my whole family up here to take this job up because I'm not getting paid. I'm having trouble making the rent. And just imagine, you're an air traffic controller. You know, any of our jobs, 99.9% effectiveness is probably pretty good, right? They can't afford to be 99% effective. They got to be 100% effective because that's our lives that they're controlling. And if you're worried about how you're going to pay the mortgage, how you're going to repay the loan or the student loan debt, or how you're going to pay for your child's medical bills, believe it or not, that's going to creep into the work life. Those personal issues are going to creep into the work life. And it's going to affect their performance. So I'm glad we have the government up and running. It was an important first step, and now we got to sit down over the next 3 weeks and try and come up with some compromise on border security and immigration, and hopefully we can do that. I'll just give you a quick update about some of the committee assignments. We've finally got our committee assignments, and I'm very pleased that I've been appointed to serve on the Agriculture Committee. That was my number one choice. Many of you heard me during the campaign talk about agriculture and the importance of agriculture and farming throughout the 22nd District, and it's been a long time since we've had a representative from either the Southern Tier or up in the Mohawk Valley or Central New York who had served on the Agriculture Committee. But to me, I always wanted to be on a committee where I thought I could do the most good for this region, and that's an area where I think I can be very effective trying to help our farmers here in this region. So I'm proud to be on that. I'm on 2 subcommittees on the Agriculture Committee. The Livestock Committee, which oversees the dairy industry, which is obviously, that's our number one agricultural part of our economy here in the 22nd District. And then I'm on the Biotechnology Subcommittee as well, which, and Horticulture, which oversees a lot of fruits and vegetables and those kinds of things. So I'm also on the Veterans Affairs Committee. And that to me, again, is a very important committee for our community. We have something like 46,000 veterans in the 22nd Congressional District. And I want to be able to use my role on that committee to help all of our veterans, whether they're facing some kind of a health issue and dealing with the VA, whether it's access to employment or job retraining or housing. Our veterans are facing a lot of challenges, particularly some of the young men and women who are returning overseas now from conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan and other conflicts overseas. To me, there's nothing worse as a country not to be able to take care of our veterans, the men and women who served our country. To me, that's one of our primary concerns, and we have to make sure as a government we're doing everything we can to make sure our veterans have access to health care, access to good paying jobs, access to housing, and that they're being helped along the lines with whatever illness they may be suffering from because of things that happened overseas, whether it's post-traumatic stress disorder or you name it. So I'm going to be on the Veterans Affairs. As part of these 2 committees, what I have said that I'd like to do, and we made an announcement a few weeks ago, I'm going to be setting up advisory committees made up of people in the 22nd District. So we're going to have an Agricultural Advisory Committee and a Veterans Affairs Advisory Committee. So if people in the audience or you know folks out in the community who would be interested in serving on one of those committees, the idea is for me to get, just like the town hall meetings, to get feedback from all of you about issues that impact agriculture or issues that are impacting our veterans. We're going to meet several times a year around the congressional district, and then maybe even look at having some smaller subcommittees within those advisory councils. So if you're interested in serving on one of those, please see Harris or Sarah or Joelle or Faith and give them your name and your contact information, and we'd love to have you help out with those committees. We're trying to get names by February 1st, and we'll probably go past that as well. But if you could sign up, we'd love to have your expertise. I'm going to stop there for now. I'd like to be able to have a lot of time for dialogue. So if you are interested in asking a question, raise your hand and I will call on you and I'll repeat your question so everyone can hear it. So, yes, sir.
Hi, Mike. My name is Mike. First of all, I would like to welcome you to our district and good luck with your job in Washington. First of all, you said in your speech, you're talking about a compromise on border security. We hope you'll stay strong, don't give in, you know. Also, there are three things that concerned me. First of all, your first act was to join the Blue Dog Coalition.
Yes.
Which didn't sit well with a lot of hardworking people who worked to get you elected.
Yes.
Second thing is Nancy Pelosi, which you, since from the beginning, said you were not going to be supporting that.
Yes.
And the third thing is meeting with Trump.
Yes.
We understand, you know, you might be talked into it, but please, you know, don't disturb the rest of the Democratic Party. That's all.
Mike, I figured I'd get those three questions, but I didn't think they'd come in the same person. But you asked great questions, and I'm going to address all of them for you. So first, on border security. Here's my thoughts on this. I don't think compromise is a bad thing. And I understand that the president has very strong beliefs on border security, what he views as border security. The Democrats have very strong views on what they see as border security. To me, I think there's some good ideas on both sides. When the president talks about a wall, I don't believe he means a wall across the 2,000 miles of the southern border from one sea to the other sea.
Oh, yes, yes,
I have to correct all of you because I can tell you that's not the intention. Now, I believe that where experts believe, first of all, you can never build a wall from one side to the other because you have mountains, you have rivers, you have land use restrictions, you have all kinds of terrain that you can't build a physical border wall across. However, listen, where it makes sense, where the experts are telling us that a physical barrier will make sense, I could support funding for that. However, I believe, and I have talked to several individuals from Homeland Security, people who are not in the administration, who are experts on immigration and Homeland Security. That is not the only solution to strengthening our borders. A physical barrier may make sense in certain areas. In other areas, you have to invest in technology, okay? You need more technology at our border crossings. You need more technology at our ports of entry. 1 out of 5 trucks that come across the southern border get inspected by these x-ray machines because they can't look at every single truck. So they have these machines that scan the inside of these trucks. So 4 out of 5 of them don't get looked at because we don't have enough of those machines to scan the trucks. So imagine what's coming through on that. We need to invest in technology to do the things we need to do to scan the trucks that are coming across the border. We need to make sure that the shipping containers that are coming into the country are being inspected by these machines. That is another area where we have to make investments. We need more manpower. You have a tremendous backlog of asylum cases right now, and you need more judges who can adjudicate these cases. We need to also reform our asylum process to make it so there isn't such a backlog. This is all part of a lot of things that I can be supportive of, but I think we have to do a lot of this together. And then, if we can, let's look at some of the other immigration issues that have been holding us back in this country. You know, I talked about during the campaign how the Senate passed immigration reform in 2013, and the House never took it up. Many of the people, Republicans actually, signed a discharge petition last year to get immigration reform on the floor. It was ultimately defeated, but there's some Republicans who also want to get some immigration reform and fix problems like DACA, do something about the Dreamers, do something which is more immediate to our area, the guest worker visa program, because so many of our farmers rely on labor coming in from other countries, and they're having a difficult time right now finding enough skilled labor to come work on apple farms and dairy farms and the other farms that are important to the upstate's economy. So I think there can be some compromise, but I think one solution, I know this is a terrible analogy, but just think of like a stew, okay? You can't just use one ingredient in a stew, right? You gotta your beef and your potatoes and your carrots and all that other fun stuff. Well, it's the same thing with border security. A wall by itself is not enough. You got to have a combination of things. More technology, more a physical barrier where it can make sense. Those are the things you have to look at. More investments in border agents and fixing some of the immigration problems that have been holding this country back. So if I can find people on both sides who are willing to try and move the ball forward and stop kicking the can down the road on things like immigration reform, because in my opinion it's been used to try and score political points, then let's get this problem solved and let's move on to some of the other concerns that we have in this country. Your next question was about Blue Dog Democrats. So I'll explain. A lot of people may not even know who the Blue Dog Democrats are. It's a coalition that I joined. And I can tell you what I have learned in my time down there. The key in Washington is building relationships. If you want to get things done, you have to build relationships. I think some folks have an image of the Blue Dog Democrats of like 25 years ago, when they were mostly a Southern-based Democratic coalition. That's not the case anymore. Most of the Blue Dogs are the two main focus of the Blue Dog Coalition is one, fiscal responsibility, so we're making sure that we pay for the things that we're spending, and we have a way to pay for it, and then also having a strong national defense. Those are really the two things, but there's a lot of diversity of opinion among the Blue Dog members on issues like immigration and everything. And no matter what caucus or coalition you're in, they don't tell you how to vote. You vote how you got to vote. But in order to try and work with other people and try and find members who want to try and get things done, you join different caucuses and you try and work with other people. Nancy Pelosi. I know that angered some people that I said that I did not vote for Nancy Pelosi. I can tell you that, to me, when I make a commitment on the campaign, it's not just an empty promise, it's something that I intend to do. So I felt that I know people support her, people don't support her, and I respect everyone's opinions on the subject. But for me, I would have liked to have seen someone else step up to run for speaker. Unfortunately, no one else did, because there's a lot of great talent within the caucus and a lot of good people who could step up and do that. But in any event, I made a campaign promise. I intend to keep those promises, and I don't expect any of you to ever vote for me again if I broke a promise I made on a campaign. What was your last question?
Trump.
Donald Trump. Why did I go to the White House to meet with the president?
Yeah.
Again, let's take him out of the scenario. My belief is... I have respect for the office of the presidency. I really, truly, honestly have respect for whoever the president is. It's something that I feel, and I've always been raised to respect the presidency and who the president is. We may have disagreements. We all have disagreements, and I respect everyone's opinion on that. But I felt that when I'm given the opportunity to go to the White House and talk to the president, whether it's President Obama, President Trump, whoever, I'm going to go. I am going to go and I'm going to talk to that president. I'm going to talk about upstate New York and what the people of this area believe in and how I can try and find some compromise with whoever that person is. I know it angers people sometimes if I go there, but I honestly feel, and I'm always going to try and look for ways to bring people together. And if I can work with the president on issues that I think can move this country forward and solve some immigration problems, I'm going to try and do it. And I can't apologize for that. It's something I believe in, and if the president invites me to the White House, I'm going to go to the White House. And
Yeah, my name is Jack Gilroy, and I was a participation government teacher at Maine Inwell for quite a long period of time. I want to give the congressman an A+. We're not used to this business of town meetings. My students. What I'm really hoping for, and I have honorable discharges from both the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Army, is that you somehow developed a persona as a congressman who begins to look at compassion, injustice, and generosity, rather than an active domination sort of situation we have had for well over 50 years. I think one way we can begin to do that is to stay out of other people's situations. Places like the Middle East that we messed up so bad under the Bush administration and others, and also Venezuela. The word is in the air now that something may happen there.
Right.
It would be a major mistake, many of us believe, who have been around for many more years than young congressmen. If you look at the record of what we have done in other countries with secret deals with the CIA, it's going on now in Venezuela. Where are you going to go? What sort of leadership will you have to try to bring us back on the good American people that we are?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question, and I think you're right. We have tremendous power in this country, not just militarily, but diplomatically. And we should use our diplomacy more to try and prevent us from getting involved in military conflicts overseas, some of which we have no business being in. And I talk about that a lot when I talk about immigration and looking at the root causes of why people from Central America and the Northern Triangle are coming up, risking their lives to come through a very dangerous territory to come to this country. What are the conditions in those countries, and how can we use our influence for the positive to effectively turn around the conditions in some of those countries? Not because there's some gain for us, whatever, because it's the right thing to do, and that ultimately, if we can help make a better life for people there, they're not going to choose to come on our doorstep, and we're then dealing with the problem when they come here. So you're right. I think we really have to exercise more this diplomacy in the world. I take very seriously the commitment that I took and the power that we have in Congress to authorize military action overseas. And believe me, before I would ever vote to send any young man or woman into some conflict overseas, I want to make sure that it's in the best interest of our national security here in this country, and that we're not involving ourselves in conflicts that are going to, for whatever reason, not benefit or be directly related to our national security. So thank you for that question, and thank you for your service too. Let me go over here, sir, in the blue shirt.
Although our
Congratulations,
congratulations, sir, on your
Thank you.
election, number one. Number two, I think immigration is an important issue, okay? But I haven't slept well in 2 years. And I think we have more of a crisis in the White House itself than we do with immigration. I seem to think the Congress is stuck in this obsession with immigration, which is important. But I think we have more important problems pressing this country. And I think guns, there's so much violence in our country. I'm sorry, but there's some pressing issues that Congress must address now.
Yes.
Climate control.
Yes.
Is a big one.
Yes, absolutely. So on guns, I am a supporter. There's a bill about background checks that I support. I believe we can be respectful, and I support the Second Amendment, and I believe in a person's right to bear arms. And I think that the way I view things, if we can keep guns out of the hands of people that want to do us harm, criminals, violently mentally ill people, people who commit domestic abuse, that's where we should put our focus. Climate change, another pressing issue, absolutely, it's one of the top issues, and there will be some legislation this year coming out of the House to address climate change.
Sir, one more quick question. I think this is important. Who's to say after 3 weeks we have another shutdown?
Yes.
Have you and your colleagues discussed how are we going to avoid this? Another shutdown? I think there should be an amendment.
Yes.
Not to shut the government down.
Yes.
We can
Or
pass
something that's not that important.
Yeah, no, look, Congress could pass a law that when the appropriation runs out, that we can just continue to do a continuing resolution so the government doesn't shut down. We could do that. We could also pass a law to say that federal workers get paid during the shutdown, which would help prevent a lot of chaos.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I just, my name is Drew. When we have a situation, and I'm completely on board with him, with the person in the White House who, my personal opinion, is inept and incompetent, to know that we're being represented by somebody who is highly competent, highly, your heart is in the right place. I believe that my whole life. I know that Representative Presley from Massachusetts introduced a bill about paying the federal workers the back pay. My concern, because I know people who are federal workers, I actually, yesterday when they announced the end of the shutdown, I was at the gym and some people were crying in the locker room because they were waiting to hear if they were going to be able to get paid. Yeah. And I don't think any of us, if you hear that, I mean, these were people who were out $2,000 and they, I mean, they were making $40,000 a year and going to food banks to buy food, to get food. Yeah. So, and then I was wondering, because there's also contractors and they're not going to get paid. Yep. I know Presley has this bill. I know it was on Twitter, she was talking about that. Is there going to be something where contractors will get paid? Because if they're not paid, there's enough of them that they could really do a job on the economy. And this is a big concern,
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So one, in terms of federal workers, all federal workers will receive back pay. That was a bill that both houses passed, the president signed into law. The other issue you bring up is contractors, because you're right, many of the contractors also have been going without pay. I think they should be paid back as well. There is legislation which I do support. Okay. I'm not sure, it's her bill, there might be a couple different competing bills, but I do support that. And I think that's something that has to be done as well, because they're in the same situation.
And there's a lot more than you would think.
Right.
I think they said there's 150,000 contractors.
There's a lot.
Who are facing not getting paid.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let me go over here.
Hi, Chris Rounds.
Hi, Chris.
A couple of things. First, I think the Republican Party has invested heavily in demonstrating that government cannot function. And I would just plead with you and the Democratic House to demonstrate that it can. Second, I just plead with you to, well, you know this, you know what happened to your predecessor. Listen to the people who elected you and come and talk to us. Keep doing it.
Yes.
I know it takes a lot of your time. We desperately need that.
No, I appreciate that. Look. I think government has to function. We have seen, and I think maybe the one thing that came out of all this is people have seen some of the work that federal workers do and how it's so important to keep them on the job. Food inspections, TSA workers, air traffic controllers, the contractors that you mentioned. It's vital work. It's very hard right now to attract and retain people in the federal workforce. This is going to make it a lot harder because someone's going to ask themselves, why would I go work in the federal government when there's a chance every year I could be facing a month or two of not getting paid? And there's already shortages of positions in places like air traffic controllers. If we don't have that pipeline of people going in there, who's going to do that job? So we want to make sure that we have a qualified workforce, that we're maintaining morale, that they're being paid. That's very important. And when government works, it can actually do good. Sir.
Hi, Bob Strebel from Enpro.
Hi, Bob.
Congratulations. I'd like to get back to climate change, if we could.
Yes.
So, some facts. In 1990, 25 to 30% of lakes in the Adirondacks, I know that's not in this region, were so acidic.
It is in this district, though. We have somebody right around.
Okay, good. 25 to 30% of the lakes in 1990 were so acidic they couldn't support aquatic life.
Right.
So the EPA put into act, I think it was signed by Bush, the first one originally, the Clean Air Act, right? So now, since then, 7% now are only acidic to the point where they can't support that. So the current administration is trying to push through the EPA, the ACE effort, right? What is it, the Affordable Clean Energy Act?
Right.
Right, so that's a regulation that goes through the EPA. It's not a law that goes through Congress. What, as a congressman, can you do to counter that?
Well, I think we're gonna pass a bill this year dealing with climate change, and I'm glad you brought up the issue with the acid rain in the Adirondacks, because really the congressman who was the driving force behind that bill that President Bush signed, which is Congressman Sherry Bollard up from Utica back in the 90s, because he was very concerned about that was his primary concern, because you have emissions that may be coming from coal plants in Ohio that travel east towards New York and then cause acid rain over the Adirondacks, which increases acidity in the lakes and poisons the fish and everything else. So he was concerned about that. That's when they passed that law. This administration is trying to roll back a lot of those regulations and really kick it back to the states to then decide on how they regulate the emissions within their states, which I think is a mistake, because not every state in the Midwest is going to do what's right for New York State. They're going to do what's right for their state, not necessarily worrying about where those emissions are going to be going on later on. So we have to have some stronger regulations in terms of that to help prevent some of those issues. Amen.
Yeah, so this is on the topic of climate change, and my friend Isabel, we have two questions that kind of go together.
Yes.
Just to give a little background, I'm sure you know about this, a lot of people in this room probably do, but if you don't, this year the recent IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, said that we have 11 years to get global carbon emissions reduced by half below 1990 levels, I believe, to stay and to zero by 2050, to stay within the threshold of 1.5 degrees warming, which is the safe threshold. It's still not necessarily safe, but beyond that, the likelihood of runaway feedback loops and catastrophic change becomes much more likely. The only plan that's been talked about that would meet those timelines is the Green New Deal. I was wondering, do you support a Green New Deal? If so, what would that mean to you? Because it's been kind of vague, the talk. If not, what is your alternative? And then afterwards, my friend as well has another question.
Okay. So regarding the questions about the Green New Deal, here's my problem with the Green New Deal. And there's been a lot of talk about this online. You have some very vocal advocates. Most of the renewable energy that we have here in New York State comes from hydroelectric power. Under the Green New Deal, hydroelectric power is not considered a renewable form of energy. That's a bad thing. So I think that it should be considered a renewable energy. It's one of the cleanest forms of energy there is. I'm not quite sure why it's not part of that Green New Deal, but I will talk. I've been talking to members of Congress who support that to say you should include hydroelectric power, because I think the statistic I saw, something like 50% of the renewable energy that's created in New York State comes from hydroelectric power, and that should be included.
But if you're not supporting the Green New Deal, what is your alternative plan? Like, how do you see getting carbon emissions to 50% of 1990 levels within a decade?
Well, I think we can make investments at the federal level in cleaner energy jobs. There's a lot of things that we can be doing with solar and wind. I have one issue with a lot of these areas, like solar, like wind. They're not very labor friendly, and that's a big problem for me. A lot of these corporations that are solar and wind aren't so friendly towards organized labor, and I think that that's a problem, because they should be. I think if we could work more and involve more of our organized labor in some of these green jobs, you'd see a lot more support from both sides of the aisle. But a lot of these companies, some of the bigger ones, haven't been too friendly towards organized labor, and that's a big problem for me. Sir, today.
Sir, I'm to talk to you today. My name is Larry Copel. I'm a trustee with the Village of Endicott.
Yes.
And I'm hoping the village in your office and the staff can establish some firm lines of communication so that we can maximize the programs and grants the federal government offers, particularly in light of a state proposal to triple the budgets of literally hundreds of towns and villages.
Yes.
And nationally, you can join any group you want. You can talk to the devil himself. If you can fight the fabrications and present facts, if you can confront the cowardice that's in Washington with courage, our justice system is being manipulated and intimidated. Congressional powers have been eviscerated and the departments and all the advisory boards ignored. This administration has damaged the very fabric of the Constitution. I'm asking you to help us to repair it and bring government back to the people, have them serve the people, and have them let the people be the government.
Absolutely. Put my old hat on as a member of the Assembly, and I think it was wrong to cut aid to municipality funding for our villages and our towns, because in many areas, that's a big part of their budget, that money. It's been flat for a number of years, as you know. To go down, I think, is a problem for a lot of smaller towns and villages, particularly in upstate New York, that rely on that. So I'm hoping through our legislative efforts in the state Senate and Assembly, they can push back on that. I don't think it's a good proposal. The other point you raised is a great point, and I want people to know that I very much view this office that I hold as a tool for small businesses, for local governments, for not-for-profits, for constituents throughout this community to use to help with whatever issue it is they're working on. This morning I was in Oneida County talking to a group of volunteer firefighters, and we were looking at FEMA grants and what they call safer grants that many of the volunteer fire departments and paid departments utilize. And our region had gotten some of what they call these safer grants, but we haven't been getting some of the other FEMA grants that are in the budget that are in the appropriations every year, because we're not applying. Well, if we don't apply, some other areas that go after that grant when we should be taking advantage of that. So if there are grants that the villages and towns or fire departments or whoever are looking at, they should feel free to reach out to our office, or if they're confused as to where to go to find some of these grants, call our office. That's what we're here for. We are that resource that can go out there and try and find and research what the grants are. We can't write the grant for you, but we can certainly make you aware of the grant, and when you apply for it, we can advocate for you at the federal level. So please, I can't stress this enough. Sometimes we get focused, and it's important. There's lots of important issues at the federal level, but there's nothing more important in my mind than the person who calls the office with the IRS issue, the Social Security issue, the veterans issue, whatever it may be, because that is what I love to do, is fix those issues and fight federal agencies and all that fun stuff. So please reach out to our office.
Finally, sir, just one thing. Excuse me, but I am late for work. That being rude, I have to.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about something, or ask a question about something I think's got lost in the conversation.
Sure.
And that's infrastructure. And I've
Thank you.
infrastructure.
Thank you.
When I was a boy, I can remember I had relatives that worked on President Eisenhower's interstate highway system. And we've got crumbling highways, bridges, airports. And it would be a great way to put a lot of people back to work with good paying jobs, not minimum wage service jobs.
Right.
You know, stimulate the economy. The longer you wait, the more it's going to cost
Yep.
to do this. We have to do this. So no one talks about it.
Well, I'm talking about it. And I want to put those building trade guys to work, the men and women to work. That's what I want to do. And I'll tell you, you brought up Blue Dogs earlier, but this is another area that we've been pushing for. You know, the House is talking about waiting to May or June to put some kind of an infrastructure package on the floor, and I think that's way too late. We have to start working on that right away. You can drive on any road out here, any bridge. You can see all the structural deficiencies in our bridges, the water and sewer lines that are underneath the ground, the energy grid. If we want to bring more green jobs online, we got to start by investing in our energy grid, because our grid is so old here in New York. You can't bring more solar and wind online because it gets overloaded sometimes because the grid is so old. We have to invest. Water quality. That is becoming more and more of an issue all throughout the country, and particularly here in upstate New York. We have water quality, we have pipes that were built decades ago. Lead pipes, contaminated water, you name it. But we have to start investing in our infrastructure. This is an area where I think, and I hope we can sit Democrat and Republican. The president's talked about infrastructure. He loves building things. Let's build things. Talk about getting people excited again in their country. If we can put an infrastructure bill together and put some people back to work, we can actually get some things done.
Thank you.
Oh,
Hard to tell where you're
I'll go. The gentleman.
Tell from my shirt.
Yeah. You first, and then the gentleman in the green.
First of all, I want to tell you, you were the only Democrat that I voted for.
Thank you.
I went to polls thinking there's not one Democrat I'm going to vote for because I don't like none. Your platform
Thank you.
spoke volumes to me. You are the only one, and I appreciate the work that you do with the veteran community.
Yeah.
What I would like to propose, all you Trump haters, everybody here that's bashing the President of the United States, and you're all American citizens, but you're bashing the President, when you get your tax refunds this year, compare it with last year. And what you're getting over, donate it to him for his veterans, because I don't want to be sitting in a room full of hypocrites. Don't take the gifts that he's given you and then sit there and bash the man. So if you're getting more money this year, your tax reform, send it to his office to look towards the veterans. I do a lot here for the veterans. I'm a member here. The commander will tell you, I do a ton of stuff here for the veterans, a lot. So put your money where your mouth is. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you for bringing up the veterans. I don't want to lose sight of that at all in my time in office. That's important to me. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name's Ed Engelman. I'm a retired teacher. And when there's talk of building a wall, it filters down to our high school students who use it as racist commentary against the minorities that are in the classroom. And I hate to see a significant amount of money be spent on a wall that is going to be used by racists and xenophobes in our country to exclude those who want to get here like we and our ancestors got here. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll go in the back over there too.
Yes, Congressman.
Call me in.
I'm a member of 1645 from officer. The American Legion is going to be celebrating 100 years in March.
Yes.
And our membership is way down. And it's very hard to get new members in, especially those returning from Afghanistan and Iraq. One of the problems being there's a lot of veterans out there that can't join the American Legion because Congress has dated your membership. You had to be a veteran as a conflict. And I would like to see Congress overturn that every veteran can be a member of the American Legion.
Okay. Now, that's good to know. Will you please make sure you talk to Sarah in the back there, just to get that information? That's something I wasn't familiar with, but I would like to learn more. Perhaps there's some legislation we can work on.
Yeah, our membership card had the dates that you had.
Okay, all right. No, I know, look, our Legions do such great work, and I always enjoy when the Legions come out to Albany for Hill Day. I know you all come down to Washington too, but, you know, we gotta get more young people. It's so hard getting young people involved in organizations these days. Same thing with the volunteer firefighters. We're talking this morning, it's so hard to recruit and retain young people to get into the fire service, but the ways that we can work at the federal level to try and help people get into those areas, we need them.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
What's up, Congressman? It's an honor to talk with you, and it's an honor to have volunteered for your campaign. I went to a lot of few letter canvassing for you over the summer and fall.
Yes.
also, I am a veteran and a union member of the State of Public Police Federation. I appreciate your support for both. You had talked earlier when you were talking, the subject of gun safety was going on. You had mentioned about the importance of, including mental health, mental health treatment in that. I am, a clinical social worker. I am currently working for, state, psych hospital here, Greater Lincoln Health Center. And one thing that is a problem, a serious problem in this community and in this region that has not been getting, as far as I can tell, has not been getting any serious, attention, is that, of all of the community the outpatient mental health centers in Binghamton, which is to say in Broome County, and I know this is the case also in other, counties in the region. Right now, for outpatient mental health services at any of the clinics in this area, you are generally looking at a minimum of a 2 to 3 month wait before you can get in. So, for years, those of us in the mental health field have heard that we need more mental health care to keep things for safety. But that has never, at the state or federal level, been backed up with cash. We need social workers. We need, psychiatrists. Right now, one of the most difficult things for mental health care, outpatient mental health care, which is the first line of contact, is very, very difficult for us to hire and retain psychiatrists. It is very difficult for people coming out of social work school, out of nursing school, to most of the clinics here. I've also worked for a clinic with one of the local hospitals. To be able to pay clinicians, especially young clinicians, an income where they're going to be able to make ends meet and say, okay, yes, I want to continue working in public service, which is the mental health profession, versus going into private practice, where people who are on Medicaid or people who cannot pay out of pocket, you can't, if you're on Medicaid, it's hard for you to get in with private practice.
Sure.
Also, this ties into so many other very serious issues here. 70%, based on multiple research studies over the last 10 years, at least 70% of individuals who have a substance use disorder, such as heroin addiction or methamphetamine addiction, which is coming up right behind the heels of heroin in this community, have a co-occurring mental health disorder. Now, that also includes the most deadly substance abuse addiction, which is alcoholism. That kills more people than either of those other drugs combined daily. We need more money to address this issue. You mentioned being on the Veterans Affairs Committee. There is what I consider to be misguided effort to privatize veteran service.
Agreed.
One of the biggest problems with that is if you are saying, okay, we're going to put mental health care for veterans back into the community.
We don't have the services in the community.
Exactly. So then there are a couple of other things that need to be addressed along with that. This includes access, funding for supported housing. If you don't have a safe place to live, if you don't have a job, through vocational supports, when I'm sitting across from a client who is borderline homeless, somebody who can't afford to feed themselves, for me to sit down and try and work on mental health issues, those are the mental health issues.
Right.
So what we need is money for staff. We need funding for housing programs. We need funding for, vocational assistance programs, such as programs that reimburse employers for hiring people with disabilities. And, we need that now.
Yeah. On the VA too, I oppose privatization of the VA. We have to reform the VA, fix the VA, make it easier and clear some of these backlogs. But by privatizing it, I don't think that's going to do the solution. There has to be more, we have to have more funding towards some of this. There was a lot of legislation, good legislation, that was passed last year and actually signed into law, dealing with opioids, dealing with substance abuse. The problem with it, there was no funding behind it.
And a lot of it did not address mental health.
Correct. But that's where it's got to start. Congressman Tonko had some legislation that would put some funding behind some of these laws that were passed and trying to address the mental health issue, look at access, in especially in underserved areas like here and throughout the 22nd district. That's where the focus should be. Because you're right, a lot of times the services will go to some of these big communities, not coming to the smaller areas. And the state, not to pick on the state, I think has done a poor job. Up in Utica, where I live, we had a facility that closed, an adult inpatient services facility, and the state promised us, oh, don't worry, we're going to invest in the community-based services. Well, that never really happened.
And that came very close to happening.
Exactly, what's happening here too.
In health center, we almost lost a lot of our inpatient beds.
Right.
Just a few years ago, and I got back to community for stepping up.
Absolutely, but we got to be vigilant because they always come back and they look at those areas and they always think, well, we could send it to Syracuse or they'll go to Albany or something like that. That's not what should happen because there's waiting lines in Syracuse, there's waiting lines in Albany, and when we have perfectly good facilities here, we should make sure we keep those facilities and strengthen those facilities. We got to put some federal dollars, hopefully, and state dollars behind it.
All right.
Ben?
My name is Kim Cameron, and my comment is going to be about a lot of the stuff that we're hearing today. We're hearing an awful lot about how the federal government needs money to do a whole bunch of different things. We're hearing, often we hear about how people don't want to pay taxes for things, that they're looking forward to get greater rebates back. What I would argue is that every single dollar that we put into tax money is a dollar well spent. We should be saying, and you maybe can figure out some way to get the message out of how much our government does do for us. Instead of it being, we need dollars for this, we need dollars for that, it should be, look at what our government does for us. This is where you want to put your money because it is the most economically feasible way of getting all the services we're looking for.
Yeah. We have to look at, certainly when it comes to some of the bigger corporations, and I talked about this during the campaign, but we have to start to focus on it now that things are moving forward here in the House. You have companies, major pharmaceutical companies, major corporations, that will put their businesses overseas in foreign jurisdictions, and they do that for a specific reason to avoid taxes here in New York State. To me, that's wrong. If they're making profit, but they happen to have their address in the Cayman Islands, they should be paying taxes here because they're American companies. So we want to make sure that our tax policy doesn't reward companies for going overseas like that, and then we can invest in things like mental health treatment, like infrastructure, like education, the other things that we need to be investing in to really get people in the middle class and working individuals, people in our community, a better life, not the fat cats in Wall Street. Sir, you guys have a lot of questions. I'll go both. I know gentleman here in the green shirt, and then gentleman standing right now.
I would like to push back on what your response was for the Green New Deal.
Okay.
I mean, this is a crisis that we have, and everybody's got to participate. This is all hands on deck. We need a Green New Deal. We need it to make a huge difference in the future of the world. And to say that labor is not on board isn't acceptable to me. We got to get them on board. And if you could talk to people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others who are pushing this and figure this out, We do that. We
Oh,
make a Green New Deal happen.
I think we're on the same page. I think we're on the same page about the crisis of climate change. We're definitely on the same page. We may have different ideas on how we solve that crisis. The things that I want to make sure that we're doing is that we are investing. To me, it doesn't make sense not to include something like hydroelectric power in the Green New Deal.
That can be fixed.
I agree. So that's what I'm talking to members in Congress. We got to fix that. Maybe they just don't know enough about that or how we produce renewable energy here in New York State. But it's about communication. We have to get to a point where we are getting away from some of the dirtier burning fossil fuels and into greener technology. I just want to do it in a way that makes sure that we're benefiting places like New York State and workers here in New York State, because I want those jobs to be going to them. I want those jobs to be paying good wages. And providing good health care to those people who are going to be installing those solar panels and wind turbines and all the other types of equipment that goes along with renewable energy. Yes, sir.
A few things. Kind of building on his comment about the Green New Deal.
Yes.
Scott Seal. Scott Seal.
Hi, Scott.
And you're on the Agricultural Committee.
Yes.
And the Department of Agriculture oversees the Forest Service. And I've lived out west. I've seen what's happened to our national forests under this administration. It's getting worse. So we hope that you will try to take action to preserve our national forests, as well as wilderness areas like national wildlife refuge, places like that. Number two, I hate to give you another comment about the wall. But Donald Trump said Mexico would pay for it. So after he has this discussion at the wall, a penny of the wall, Mexico would pay for it.
Right.
Why are we talking about it? Lastly, you said the Blue Dog Democrats are interested in fiscal responsibility. And we've got people talking about health care and the value that we get for our taxes. Is it appropriate? And we have an aging population. We have people who are struggling to find a way to take care of their elders, struggling to find a way to get them the nursing home care, whatever the medicines they need, the in-home care they need. And it brings me down to something connected with what Jack Gilbert was saying earlier too about our influence overseas. I heard not too long ago a Republican senator say that this nation spends nearly as much on our military as the rest of the world combined. And when you add in the retirement benefit packages that we take care of too, then it's more than the rest of the world combined. And the idea that one country should be spending as much as the rest of the world combined on military, to me, is not fiscal responsibility. It's a great issue. Maybe we can look at saving money in the military and applying that money to our elderly population, which we want to take care of. Because they raised us.
Yes.
And it's funny, I looked up how many soldiers are stationed overseas. I can't remember the number now, but it's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
So to me, that's not responsible.
No, listen, I think the way that we spend our military budget could be spent a lot wiser while still not cutting services, providing what we need to provide, technology and equipment and everything else. It was funny because I was having a conversation with an assemblyman up towards Oneida County. He was a 25-year Marine, and we were talking about the wall, and he was saying $5 billion. You know what we wasted in some countries like Afghanistan on construction for some of these contractors and things like that. He said there's a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse that we can go after while still making sure that we're providing all the tools we need to the servicemen and women overseas and protecting us. So we have to look at that. Audits, things like that have to be done to make sure the money that is going in is being spent appropriately. And then we can, you're right, invest in things like caretakers, people. We have a real crisis right now with people who are taking care of a child, a mother, a father, a grandparent. There's so many caregivers out there who are sacrificing their time and energy and their own money caring for people. And we have to do a lot more to pass some laws to help provide some relief to our caregivers. There's some good bills. There's actually a caucus that is looking at this. Another caucus, I know. But there's a caucus that's looking at caregiver caucus. But looking at how we can provide some incentives, tax incentives or whatever it is to caregivers who many times have to go into their pocket and provide whatever it is for a grandparent. We have to be more sensitive to those needs. Yes, ma'am.
Sort of following up on what he just said, because that was one of my questions about the Blue Dog. I'm sorry, I'm Jan Strauss from Endicott. And I know education wasn't mentioned except by you.
Yes.
And I'd like to, I know that you're really up on and strongly support public school education. So I just want to make sure it's mentioned.
Yes. I wish our education secretary was as strong as
Yes.
Maybe called in for a few hearings this year, I assure you that.
Yes, sir. Anyway, I have those numbers. We spent last year $610 billion on defense. If you add up the next 7 countries, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, India, France, UK, and Japan, total spent $578 billion. Now living in Endicott and being old, like back when IBM was here, I know people personally who are at their desk and got a call from the Pentagon saying, you know, I got $900 million left and it's almost the end of the fiscal year. What do you got for me? They didn't even know what they wanted. And I also heard you mention audit, good start, because I know some of those audits were buried. And so my question is, when I looked up the Blue Dog site,
yes.
All right, and you mentioned it, it says that they want to ensure a strong national defense. What else do we have to do? I want to know what that means to you.
Well, I think we all want a strong national defense. I mean, it's one of the first priorities of government.
So I want to know what that means financially.
It means to me, and everyone may have different opinions on it. I think we have to make sure that we are taking care of our military. We're investing in making sure they have the right tools and equipment that they need when they are in conflicts overseas. I can tell you that I have a new colleague of mine, a congressman from New York City area, Staten Island. He was a veteran. He was in a vehicle. I think it was Iraq. I can't remember if it was Iraq or Afghanistan. I think it was Iraq when he was in the service, and they drove over an IED and it blew up. And the only thing that saved his life is the fact that Congress actually passed a bill providing some more funding for some extra layer of steel below the truck. So the device would not go through and kill all the service members in the vehicle. To me, that's wise spending, to make sure that we're keeping our men and women safe. Now, all the money spent on some of these big, huge corporation contractors that are going overseas that we're hiring to build stuff here and there, to me, that is the stuff we got to look at, and that's where a lot of waste is. And also we got to look at what conflicts we're getting involved in. Are they in the best interest of our national security here? What is the objective? Why are we sending young men and women to this country or that country to die for whatever reason it may be? Is it to keep us safe here or for other reasons? So we have to be very prudent about where we're investing.
Jessica Keefe from Bakerton.
Hi, Jessica.
I have a daughter who's a teacher, and I come from a family of teachers. My daughter dips into her own pocket daily to take care of her students. She teaches in Rochester, New York, a very poor district. You gotta, this is the future of our country, these kids. And a lot of them have 2 strikes before they ever get to school. And if we don't do something to save these kids and to help the teachers, we're in trouble.
Right.
Taxes, I don't mind paying taxes at all. But when every citizen of the United States gets the same benefits that every member of Congress and Senate gets, I'll pay all the money in the world.
Yes.
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 Because a lot of people are getting shortchanged. They're in Washington working for us, but that has gone away. I'm sorry.
Right.
And it's time that it comes back around.
Yep. Look, as a husband of a teacher who's here today, I feel very strongly about our teachers and our public education system, and I believe that there has to be a whole lot more focus at the state level and the federal level on public education, because you're right, most of these children, especially in high poverty areas, whether they're in inner cities or more rural communities, are coming into the classroom with a whole new set of challenges that we weren't facing many, many years ago. And if we don't give them a shot at school, they don't have a shot at home, they're not gonna have a shot at life, and then we're all gonna pay for it later on when they're either incarcerated or on social services or worse. So let's make sure that we're making the investments early on in things like early childhood education, that our funding is in place. That's an issue here in New York State. And I have gripes about how New York State funds some of our high poverty districts. I think more focus should be going on those schools like Binghamton and surrounding communities that really need state assistance because they don't have the tax base that some of the wealthier areas like Westchester County or Long Island have. So we need to make sure that we're investing in lower class sizes, that we're paying our teachers a fair wage. You know, teachers should not have to strike because they got 40 kids in a class. That's crazy, 30 kids in a class. That's not optimal for education. And you know, 18 kids at the most, 20 kids in the class is what it should be. And we're seeing classroom sizes of over 30 children. There's no way you can teach to a child in that kind of condition. So we have to make sure we're investing in our education.
I'd like to talk about a different kind of wall, and that would be our flood walls here. Broome County is one of the most impacted counties in New York State in terms of number of storms and dollars of damages and flooding. In this neighborhood in particular has the largest number of people and number of structures that would be affected by flooding, or that are affected by flooding. So I would just urge you to work with the Army Corps of Engineers. There's an Upper Susquehanna River Basin Comprehensive Flood Damage Reduction Study going on, but that's been going on probably for 9 years.
Are the Army Corps doing that? Are they doing that study? Who's doing that study?
The Army Corps.
Okay.
So I just know by patterns it'll probably be another 10 years before a report is actually produced. If you could expedite that and make flood project funding available for this area, it's desperately needed. It doesn't take a catastrophic flood to cause millions of dollars of damage here.
Right. No, I'm very familiar with some of the flooding issues that have happened in the southern tier. I've had issues as a member of the state assembly up in the Mohawk Valley. In fact, this past weekend, because we had warmer temperature, we had a lot of rain outside of Utica. One of the villages up there flooded. This is like the 4th or 5th time in the last 10 years they flooded some of these homes. I think a lot of this goes back to infrastructure spending. That's an area where we should be making investments. If we can put an infrastructure package together, a lot of it should be going towards communities to help with things like flood walls and flood mitigation projects. I'll reach out to the Army Corps of Engineers. I wasn't aware of that study, but I did speak to a gentleman from the Army Corps of Engineers who does live here in Broome County, so I'm sure he's very familiar with it. But I will reach out to them and see what's going on with that.
I think it'll come to whatever level of the federal government for approval to move forward. If it could be expedited,
Right.
money put behind it, it would do this area a great deal.
It would, and I think that'll go a long way to help trying to prevent some of these floods, but we also have to look at, when these floods do happen, how to make FEMA more effective. I get angry because unless you meet a certain threshold statewide, sometimes our area won't qualify for FEMA assistance. Well, that's difficult. The threshold should be based more on a regional basis as opposed to looking how much the state was affected by a particular storm. Because we get high levels of storms in our area, but may not reach whatever threshold FEMA has set statewide, and then we don't qualify for any assistance. So that's another area where we have to look at changing some of the laws to adapt to current day situations.
So Thomas DiNapoli put out a report, which he does in every year, and that one he had indicated that New York State gives $35 billion more to the feds than they actually get back. Actually, it turns out of the 50 states, 40 states in the country get more federal dollars than they actually contribute. Surprisingly, out of those 10 givers, New York State, Massachusetts, they all happen to be Northeast, they all happen to be blue states. The states that tend to actually get more money, South Carolina, Georgia, they tend to be red states. You want to know why taxes are so low in the South? Because they pay for no services and they take the money off the Fed and don't give it to the people. What I would like to see is I'd like to see the script flipped. In years past, New York State has paid as much as $50 to $60 billion more than they've gotten back. So I would like to see that flipped. One of the areas that she mentioned does happen to be infrastructure. Now that New York State has a much more cohesive delegate team, Congress, the House sets the bills, sets the spending. My personal opinion, block grants or pox on blocks grants and stuff. Along with what one said, New York State has over 18,000 bridges. More than 50% of those 18,000 bridges are more than 75 years old. 500 of them are over 100 years old. There are 7,000 dams in New York State. Over 400 of them have been classified as highly disastrous. Absolutely infrastructure, I think, and as you know, when it comes to infrastructure spending, 20% is state spending, 80% is fed. So that money should be going to the highly industrial, northeast, blue states, and that's where I think this money should go. And when you write those block grants, it needs to go into those areas. We don't need a high rise in Manhattan that they can charge $2 million a square foot down there for. It needs to go to the areas, roads, dams, bridges, that's where it needs to go.
I don't know if you all are familiar with the state comptroller's study. I'm glad he did that. He's been doing that for the last couple of years. But basically, it's something like for every dollar we send down to Washington in taxes, as New Yorkers, we get like 80 cents or 75 cents, something like that in return.
South Carolina gets $8 for every dollar.
$8, yeah. So some other states, particularly like South Carolina, send $1 down to Washington, they get like $8 in return. We get a great return on their investment. We're getting an awful return on our investment. We have to work closer as a delegation, and this crosses party lines. We should be working together closer as a delegation to try and fight back on those kinds of policies. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan used to do this study every few years as well to show the inequities between what we send down and what we actually get back in services. And you're right, a state like South Carolina, go look at their public education system. Go look at Mississippi's and some of these other states' public education system, and look at the results that they get from their student performance. We're doing a lot better than them, but we're also having to subsidize a lot of these states that don't want to provide a good public education, don't want to provide for veterans, for seniors, for caregivers, you name it. So that's an issue that we have to work better as a delegation, trying to work on these problems. There's so many hands. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to put in a word for those who can't speak for themselves. You are on the Agriculture Committee?
Yes.
You look into factory farming, and the practices of factory farming are unbelievable.
Yes, so look, you make a great point. My focus, what I want to focus on the Agriculture Committee is our small family farms, which is what we have here in upstate New York. There's lots of big conglomerates out in the Midwest and out west. There's some here too, but when we're talking about, I know we had, if you didn't try the punch, you better try the punch, because the Tioga County Dairy Princess was here. I don't know if you left, but I wanted to put a plug in for our dairy farmers, because they are so important and they are struggling right now. But you know, when we talk about farms, dairy farms in our area, a lot of them are just under 100 cows. You know, maybe you see a couple hundred, 5,000, maybe the biggest. You go out in the Midwest, they got 50,000 cows they're milking at a time.
Pig farming.
Big farming, big soybean, big corn, all this stuff. And they get big subsidies too from the federal government, believe me, that they don't need. They should be focusing those policies on our smaller farmers here, so we can try and keep our food more local, as opposed to having to go overseas and going to some of these big conglomerates that are factory farming with thousands and thousands of chickens and crates, and you know, it's just awful. We got to make sure, you know, all kinds of antibiotics being used. We got to focus on our local farmers who are here in New York State. Oh boy. I want to make someone mad at me today. I know. I had it already.
Emily Grimm, Binghamton. So I'm Coast Guard Auxiliary, and I just want to say this. The Coast Guard has been held hostage to this process. And every day I'm looking at Coast Guard families going, we're in trouble, and they show up for work. And you're worried about a wall? That's who's the wall. That's who's actually out there doing it. And they are out there doing rescues. They are an incredibly important 40,000 men and women who are not getting paid. So for me, the big thing is thinking about how do we make sure that people like this, that are vital to our defense, are not held hostage to this ridiculous process?
Right. Thank you for your service, and I think you're right exactly what's happened with the Coast Guard not being paid, doing the work. I've heard several stories from members of the Coast Guard, and it's awful. I mean, my heart breaks because you're right. If you look at where most of the drugs are coming from, they're coming on boats that are being stopped by the Coast Guard. You can listen to the El Chapo, the guy, the big drug kingpin who's on trial right now, how he brought his drugs into the country, boats coming through Miami. No, that's how they got the drugs here. So we got to make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen. We should never let the government shut down, ever. It should not happen. But short of that, because you never know what's going to happen in Washington, we should pass legislation to hold these workers harmless in case Washington can't get its act together. And I don't think, I do not believe that members of Congress should be being paid during these kinds of shutdowns like that. That's why. In the back there. Yes.
Hi, my name is Kathy Cronin. Thank you for winning your election and thank us for electing you.
We did good here in Broome County.
2 a.m. putting your side.
That's right.
I'm a middle-class taxpayer. I have never complained about the taxes that I pay. So back to taxes. Even the years that I have to write a check at the end of the year, I expect to pay my share. It hurts my heart when people of wealth and corporations fight like cats and dogs not to pay a penny because they're so afraid someone is going to get their money that doesn't deserve it. Right. And there's always going to be someone that's undeserving among, social programs. It's going to happen. Oh well. A society that's civilized takes care of its lesser members no matter what. Yes. I really wanted to ask you to comment on what are we leaving by this wonderful tax break to our children, our children's children, and their children. The deficit is unbelievable, and I hardly hear a word said about it.
Repeal.
Well, you're right. The debt is now 21 trillion. Our deficit's going to go probably above $1 trillion this year. We spend about 3.3 trillion as a country. We spend about 4 trillion as a country. We've taken about 3.3 or $3 trillion in taxes. So that's increasing our debt and our deficits, and it's going to be borne by the future generations. Look, I believe that the people who deserve tax cuts and should be paying, should be getting tax relief are people in this community, okay, middle class individuals. I don't want millionaires and billionaires getting the large benefits of a tax cut, and big multinational corporations like Spectrum. I'm sure you guys have a question about that too, so I was never giving an update on that one too. But a company like Spectrum doesn't need a $9 billion tax cut. They're doing great. These big pharmaceutical companies, these major corporations, they are reaping record profits. They're taking the money that they took in from those tax cuts and putting it towards buybacks for their shareholders, so they are enriching their shareholders. But again, people in our community are struggling, small businesses, family farms are struggling. When we have tax relief, those are the people that should be getting tax relief, not major corporations that don't need it. That's my opinion. So we have to do something about this debt and look at some of the loopholes that were not closed in the tax bill, like the ability to offshore companies their money, like closing these loopholes that these hedge fund managers take advantage of, so they pay a lower tax rate on their profits than a small business owner here in Binghamton. To me, that's wrong. Hedge fund managers are making really good money. Small businesses are struggling. Those are the people that should be getting tax relief, because that's the backbone of our economy. They're the ones here in our community who are providing jobs, investing in our communities, not these big multinational corporations.
So
based on recent Fox News polling, so this is not so-called socialist propaganda, whatever, 85% of Democrats and 70% of voters overall are in favor of raising the marginal tax rate on those who make more than $10 million annually. And then notably, there was a recent proposal to return to a 70% marginal tax rate, which was the average rate in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and at some points it was as high as 90%. Are you in support of raising this tax rate? What number would you put forth? And is this the way that you think you can pay for the infrastructure, the climate action, and Medicare for all?
I am not in favor of a 70% marginal tax rate. I do believe that wealthy individuals in this country should be paying their fair share. That's going to take some give and take and some compromise because we have divided government right now. But obviously, millionaires and billionaires, I think, should be paying their fair share of taxes. I think they should be paying their fair share into Social Security and Medicare. They're not. All their money off of investments, pay nothing into Social Security. That's wrong. And we have to worry about the solvency of Social Security and Medicare, which I want to make sure is protected now for this generation and for future generations, because it's not an entitlement, it's an earned benefit. But we should be doing that by making sure millionaires and billionaires are paying their fair share.
So what number would you put up?
I don't know if I have an exact number that I would put up. I want to be able to go back and talk to folks and see what an ideal number is. Obviously, my belief is that people should be paying their fair share, and we need to make sure that we're investing in the things we need to invest in. I don't believe corporations should have gotten the big tax cut that they got, and we can look at that, but that's where we should start.
Thank you. I'm so glad you're on the Veterans Committee. I'd like to come back to that one moment. I'm a psychologist. One of my great privileges in life was to work at the VA for a time and to help those, as Lincoln said, before the battle. I'm just so worried. From what I'm reading, the Trump administration and the Koch brothers are pushing very hard to privatize the VA administration, to shut down hospitals. When I was there, there's problems. I had to tell patients we couldn't see them for months. That's a problem. I don't deny that. But the VA seems like they do great work. They use evidence-based treatments. They do great research, and it seems like they really, really help our veterans. And I hope that on that committee you'll help the VA stay solvent and keep doing the great work they're doing.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that. I appreciate the Binghamton Devils shirt because I'm dropping the puck next month. So, well, I'm torn. I also have to do the comments in the district, and I always tell people that I think this is the only congressional district that has 2 AHL hockey teams in it. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm running with it. But you're right. I'm against privatizing the VA. The VA can be fixed. We can clear some of these backlogs. We need more healthcare providers in the VA to help do that. We should be looking at things like loan forgiveness or incentives to healthcare workers or doctors to go work at the VA, student loan debt forgiveness. Those are areas where we can focus. And if you worked at the VA for a number of years, we'll assist you with your federal loan and your student loan debt. That's where I think we can help clear some of the backlog. I don't want to see healthcare profit-driven. We need to be focused on the patients and make sure that the men and women, especially who served our country, are getting care in a timely manner.
Thanks. Paul LeBlanc. A couple things concern me. When we talk about corporations that are too big to fail, what we've ended up with is corporations that are too big to sanction. When you levy a $40 million fine on a corporation that's less than 1% of their annual income, it's not really sanctioned at all. And here we are with all this wealth in the country, and we can't figure out a way to give the average citizen reasonable health care and a living wage. So I'd love to hear maybe some ideas. There's a lot of places in the world where this has been sorted out.
Yes.
There's a lot of really good ideas on how to work this out. Criminal justice, education, so forth and so on. Yet we can't seem to figure it out. So healthcare and a livable wage, I'd love to hear some comments about that.
You know why we can't figure it out? Because of money in politics. That's why we can't. That's why the first bill we're going to pass in the House is HR1, a campaign finance bill, which is long overdue. We're going to take up because so much influence in Washington is because of these big corporations down there who are driving a lot of that influence and preventing some good reforms from happening on those issues that you talked about. So I'd like to see Citizens United overturned. I'm not optimistic on that one there, given the makeup of the Supreme Court, but you know, people think it's a long shot. I think we should be looking at a constitutional amendment on this issue. For a long time. Short of that, HR1 is a bill that's going to look at providing a lot more transparency and disclosure over campaigns, political spending, and making sure that we are aware of some of these groups, these shady outside groups who are involved in these campaigns. They're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to influence different issues.
You know, just a quick follow-up. When legislation gets authored by the lobbyists who are supposed to be the subject of this, then we have a real problem. Is there any way to attribute where some of these things come from?
Yeah. Well, there's also a bill that I'm a supporter of that a new member is introducing to try and get away with that revolving door where you can go work in government and you go work for the lobbying firm and then you go work for the corporation. That should not happen. That's one of the bills that we're trying to incorporate into this campaign finance package to try and get away from some of that outside influence. Because you're right. You know, it's not just among members of Congress. It's among folks working in these agencies who can be influenced to go work for the lobbying firms, and then they're writing the bills that are whatever group they want to pass. Sir, and then Mayor.
Martin, well,
yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
One of the things I think you could help the district on in the U.S. Department of Agriculture is wind farms for farmers. Milk consumption is going down, and the land around here is not really good for vegetable or grain growing, but wind farms for farmers would be a great thing to do. They can put their land to use and make money for them that they desperately need. Second is infrastructure support. We need a wall for America that protects Americans from crumbling roads. If you want to waste money on concrete and steel, we could put it into our own area right here in 22nd. Because you can bring home the bacon is what we really need. And one of the other things that the Department of
steel, right?
Yeah, concrete and steel. There's clean water programs, pure water programs. I know the Department of Agriculture funds rural water programs. I've seen it in upstate New York where they put water lines around through empty fields, and what happens is people build factories and they build homes there. They did it along, they're doing it along to the airport now, where they put water lines up to the airport, and by golly, homes are being built along.
Sure.
So water is really important, and I know the Department of Agriculture funds programs that in rural areas.
Right.
So
yeah,
it's something that you can do to help us out.
That's definitely an area that I want to focus on, especially trying to look at those rural areas who struggle to get grants sometimes. You know, New York as a whole is not considered a rural state, and a lot of times some of these grants will only go to rural states, which is wrong. Because we're a rural community.
We are rural mostly.
Mostly. It should not be based on what the state is as a whole. It should be looked at by more of a community or regional basis.
Right.
I was talking to a professor at one of our state universities about that not too long ago. The struggle with trying to get some funding from some federal agencies because New York might not be considered rural, so we have to look at that.
My final point is that the whole thing with the wall and the immigration thing is phony. It's just an election ploy. Immigration problems have gone way down to 10% of the levels that were under the second Bush administration, and we shouldn't consider that an issue. The issue is drugs that are coming through. If there's anything, it's coming through the ports of entry. This is where the money should be spent, not on something that's fake.
How are we doing on time here?
We're already, we're
Okay.
good.
We do just a couple more questions.
Hi, Elaine Livingston, my great-granddaughter of Philip Livingston, one of the founding fathers and signer of the Declaration of Independence. I've been reading up on what a lot of our founding fathers wrote about and what they thought about when they were creating our country. And one of the things that they warned against was too powerful corporations. And that corporations are not people, and we need to get that constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, and that would solve getting money out of politics, and it would change a lot of the issues that we're having with the funding problems, because the 1%, top 1% of the income people are basically controlling the government's policies, because they can use their money as leverage to get the politicians to do what they want. And you know, if that power was taken away from them by having uniform funding of the political campaigns, then we could have the money available to fund Medicare for all, climate change policies, and so forth. And I do want to make one thing about that with the Green New Deal. I think the reason they don't include hydropower is because hydropower can be very destructive to the environment and worsen climate change if they put in new dams, like they're talking about damming the Colorado at another place, and it's already not making it back to the ocean. And so I think it's okay that, we should say, all right, let's use all our existing hydropower, but we need to really work on upgrading the grid and being able to do solar and wind power as much as possible here in New York State, because we really don't want to dam any more rivers up. That's not a good solution.
As I mentioned during the campaign, upgrading the grid will allow more renewable forms of energy to get onto the grid, because it's so old here in New York, it gets overloaded at peak times, and sometimes power has to be dumped off the grid because it just can't get on. So we can encourage more wind, solar, geothermal, whatever it may be, get onto the grid if we had an updated grid. So we have to focus on that. I just want to be sensitive to the hydroelectric power that we are creating here in New York State, and the thousands of jobs that support that as well, if we're taking into consideration any changes. But that's something that I certainly understand and want to work on.
Susie, you encourage that. There's all kinds of places out west that they're going to dam up things that really shouldn't be. They're going to destroy forests, and we need more forests because that's fighting against the climate change.
Right. So maybe look at existing,
big picture.
Look at existing and protect, hold harmless existing, and put in some requirements for it going forward.
Yeah, a couple of, asking for a couple of comments. Thank you for holding this town hall meeting. The Federal Reserve Bank, do you have any comments on that? And Electoral College?
Where do I begin? To be honest with you, I really haven't formed an opinion on the matter. I am someone who believes that whoever gets the popular vote should be the president. I supported something here as a state legislator called the National Popular Vote Movement, which we finally passed into law here in New York State, which I think is sort of a constitutional change, maybe the way to go, to try and encourage some kind of a state-by-state compact that says whoever gets the national popular vote will get that state's electoral votes, regardless of what happens in that state. So maybe that's a way to look at things going forward. Is there something specific about the Federal Reserve that you're interested in? You're asking about, do we need a Federal Reserve? Or? Yes.
It's going to come up soon.
What's that?
It comes up every, I don't know, month, 2 months. where people say, we gotta stop this, or we gotta change this, or we gotta do that. It's
Right.
100 years now.
Yeah, no, I support the Federal Reserve, and I believe, I don't want to see any president have too much authority over what they're doing on an independent basis to set interest rates and things like that. So I'm supportive, but it's an area I can learn a lot more on, and certainly would love to hear your ideas on it too.
Well, I just don't think it's a president, it should be Congress' responsibility.
Sure.
And no one knows anything about it.
Right.
So,
Right. Okay.
so,
All right. I'll do one more question, and then, yes.
About minimum wage.
It should be increased federal.
It's unlivable as it is right now. It hasn't been changed in what, 10 years, but Congress's salary has been changed several times in that amount of time.
No, it should absolutely be raised. I'm open to ideas on what that number is. I also think that we have to, as part of that conversation, we have to be talking about investing in job training programs that lead to careers that pay better than minimum wage. That's an area that I worked on here at the state, and I want to work on at the federal level. We have good paying jobs in the trades, in advanced manufacturing, light manufacturing, healthcare, hospitality that are also going unfilled, because I don't think we're doing enough to prepare young people for some of these kinds of jobs that are out there. There's lots of job openings, and not enough people with the right skills to get those jobs. And many of these jobs, particularly the trades, end up in very good paying jobs that pay better than minimum wage. So I think we ought to look at both at the same time. Michael, you can have the last word, Michael. I don't want you going to Bob Joseph and saying I didn't go on.
Yeah, but
Don't go on anyways.
I'm always on. Tomorrow Sunday.
I know, Monday.
But let's start off with, first of all, Congressman, congratulations on your win.
Thank you.
We haven't seen each other, so I haven't been able to
I know, I haven't seen you.
Thank you for that as well. Let's start off. First of all, I want to say, on behalf of many of the people who didn't vote for you, that we were encouraged to hear that you were speaking with Republicans as well as the Democrats in trying to move forward and try and represent the party, the district in this area, not just your party.
Sure.
Especially on such a close win, that's a very important thing to be reminded of. And I know many people here today support your views on the left, but there is a large amount of the district that does not.
Absolutely.
And I was encouraged to hear that, less so today at this moment, but encouraged. But I am also concerned about something that I heard you say on WMBF. I've heard you say it 3 times in your town hall. You've mentioned several times that there is a break with the leadership, that there is what seems to be a division that has been growing from Nancy Pelosi and the other leadership in your party. And at the same time, you've mentioned how you have short staff. We know that there are some other issues in terms of the committee that you were denied. These are serious concerns, and we've seen consistently off of similar situations is that a representative who has such a conflict is being treated with this reprimand, then has their voice silenced. This doesn't help anyone. We may disagree on a few things. I don't want you to fail because that means our district fails.
Of course, absolutely.
So I want to understand and be very clear, what is your status here? Are you being relegated to the outside? Or is there an issue because you've mentioned it?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Michael, and I appreciate you bringing it up. I can tell you, if I felt that I was being punished by leadership because I did not support Nancy Pelosi, I would have no problem screaming and yelling about that. But in all fairness, I think there was an article in Political that was talking about a representative downstate who didn't get her committee assignment, and somehow I got lumped into that article because I didn't get onto the Armed Services Committee. The fact is, I asked for 5 committees. Armed Services was one of them. It wasn't my top choice, but I wanted agriculture, as I always talked about during the campaign. That was an important committee assignment for me. And Armed Services is a very competitive committee, particularly when you have so many new members who have service backgrounds coming in. You have many veterans who came in, were elected this year, and obviously when you have some military background, you get a little more preference for the Armed Services Committee. But I'm very happy with the committee assignments I have. I think of the 2 committees that I could pick, where I think I can do the most good for this area, agriculture and Veterans Affairs are those 2 committees. I was very critical of Ms. Denny because she chose financial services. I don't know too many Wall Street banks in Binghamton. And that committee, I felt, was the wrong choice for this community. Agriculture is a committee I can do a lot of good on, I believe, as well as Veteran Affairs. And I always said, no matter what committee I get on, I'm going to look for those committees where I can do the most good for this community. And with 46,000 veterans in this community, and dairy farmers, which are contributing a couple $100 million into our economy, those are two areas where I think I can do a lot of good. We're fully staffed. We all get the same budget in terms of staffing. There's no way around that. I think we have one more person we're trying to bring on, but we have Faith and Harris, who are here in our Binghamton office. We have Sarah, who's our district director, and we're fully staffed in our Utica office, and we're fully staffed down in Washington. And despite getting 79 out of 85 in the office lottery, which is my fault, not Nancy Pelosi's, because I picked it. I think I got a darn nice office in the Canada office building. So, thank you all.